One man, a notorious case for colonialism, on our second episode of Video Responses.
Hello everyone, today we are going to talk about Bruce Gilley's very controversial article of the case for colonialism. As Bruce Gilley suggests, colonialism led improvements in third world countries, therefore undeveloped countries should reclaim their colonial toolkit. Good governance agenda, as he says, should be replaced by colonial governance agenda, and history should be embraced.
There, Bruce Gilley invites us to question the anti-colonial discourse by suggesting an alternative and highly controversial brand new type of a colonial rule, where colonial governance is offered as an alternative to failing national governances, whereas this new type of colonialism can be regional, or it can be Hong Kong style, or it can be via transnational corporations.
Related to Alp's point, Gilley suggests that colonialism can return, of course, with the consent of the local people. Gilley says there are two failures in the anti-colonial critique. First of them, it is hard to analyze and also hard to enumerate things that matter. And secondly, there is no substitute of colonialism. It is hard to ask if colonialism has not to happen, what will be its replacement?
He adds an anti-colonial discourse critique by saying that anti-colonialism did actually more harm than good, and it failed to improve people's lives. The Hong Kong style of colonialism, as he calls the charter cities, is what Gilley is offering as a method of neo-colonial rule.
However, this colonization process, as Gilley suggests, recolonization, has three problems. First, it is hard to make local people to accept a colonized authority. Second, it is also hard to have the consent of the West to come and colonize these places. And thirdly, it is hard to do because it's quite expensive. In the second article by Colonialism, there are critics that are talking about Gilley's article are historically inaccurate. There is no empirical evidence, and also there are abundance of academic scholarship, and also it also affects the visibility of the third world quarterlies by its post-colonial legacy.
The critiques that Colleen Flaherty mentions go as far as associating or considering Gilley's arguments with Holocaust denial. And also, Gilley has been criticized by not expanding our knowledge, therefore his article has no place in the academia.
Colin Flaherty also put another important question: what's going to happen to disfavor research? Well, he suggests not a reaction, but a reboot. Authors will criticize this kind of articles to prevent further ones to be published. And also reflecting two sides in a debate, he says, will lead much more concrete solution. And in addition to this, preventing these kind of articles to be published is also against the freedom of speech.
As we move to Sandu Hira's The Colonial Critique of the Racist Case of Colonialism, we see that she starts her words by saying, white racist scholar Bruce Gilley. This argument is actually a borderline case of ad hominem, which Sandu Hira attacks the personality of Bruce Gilley, but actually she doesn't make a point about his arguments. And second, she uses the words civilized people in general. The title and the first sentence is a shocking insult. So we don't understand what she means as civilized people. She argues that if we change the words in the first paragraph of Gilley's article into Nazism and Hitler, this article would be a no-no to publish. But actually, associating Gilley and Nazism is a form of smearing, in the sense that Nazism is an evil that everyone agreed upon.
Even though there are three refusals of the Bruce Gilley's article from the editorial board, the Third World Quarterly published the article by saying that it is a debate and also it is against freedom of speech. However, at that point, Sandu Hira puts another question, and this is related with the ethics. Sandu Hira says it is not about true or false about the issue, it's about right and wrong. and he elaborates this in his book Decolonizing the Mind. In response to Gilli's case for colonialism, there are reparations that she puts forward, and like for those as first, like the usage of the land. If a colonized country uses land, then it should pay the rent. And also there are labor issues related with paying the enough amount of wage to workers who are like working, and also there are the amount of the goods and also price of the goods that colonized countries came and exploited. They have to pay the rent in here. In addition to this, there are also issue of compensation of the harmed people who have been trailed unequally, and also there is also like paying the debt issue with also the interest. And Sandra Hira puts those forward to criticize and form an alternative to Bruce Gill's case for colonialism.
In addition to these, we see that Sandra Hira also raises three important questions. First, how do you measure the benefits of colonialism? Second, how Bruce Gilly used and gathered the data to provide evidence for his claims. And third, would better facilities legitimize the crimey nature of the act of colonialism?
In Sarah Khan's article, we also see the similar criticisms towards Bruce Gilly. She says that it's historically inaccurate and also misuses the existing post-colonial scholarship. In addition to this, Sebe in his article talks about cosmopolitan nation building, and Gilly somehow misunderstands this concept.
Sahar Khan's article actually consists of a perfect criticism of Bruce Gilly, as she provides the historical background, the inaccuracies. So she objects to Gilly's theory by providing evidence from research. So she's not doing any smearing, any name calling, any ad hominems or something like that.
In Dupas and Broda, in their article, basically says there is no enough evidence to compare costs and benefits, and also colonial and not colonized. The basic thing here is it's not a valid argument, because in the research, no researcher compared the colony and the uncolonized. They only compared a colony and other colony. In addition to this, Dupas and Broda says that Gilly somehow ignored the inherent racism. And now we move to our critiques to the articles that we have just mentioned. Firstly, Gilly used divide and rule strategy to only justify his case. Like he's being picky. For example, in the case of divide and rule, he gives Kenya, which is a good example. But on the other hand, there are a bunch of other examples where divide and rule strategy caused real problems. For example, in Cyprus. He also mentions about the production case in the Guinea-Bissau. He says that production has fallen almost double when the Cabral came in charge. However, the point is this: Portuguese didn't use all of this production to contribute it to the local population. And also another extreme example is India, where British did monoculturalism and used the land only for their own purposes. So this made the land inefficient. Another point is the subjective legitimacy. Gilly says that there are places that respond good to colonialism. To a certain degree, yes, infrastructure, education and health, those benefited the local population. However, these benefits was not distributed equally among the society.
On Bruce Gilly's point of view, we can actually refer to two examples. First, Gilly sees colonialism as a way of development or tackling underdevelopment. We also see that colonialism stopped any attempts of self-development that were present beforehand. So we can exemplify from Egypt under Muhammad Ali Pasha. So Egypt already was taking projects of development. Then when the colonizers came to Egypt, these projects actually halted. In our second example, we can look at Baltaliman Treaty of 1938 between the Ottoman Empire and Britain. So the classical anti-colonial discourse claims that the treaty actually destructed the Ottoman economy, and therefore the economic colonization of the Ottoman Empire began. But Zafer Toprak criticizes this view with some figures. Actually, he says that the Ottoman economy became monetized, liberalized, and started to get modernized after the treaty get into the effect. So we see that Zafer Toprak's arguments is actually a better objection against the anti-colonial discourse. So when I was thinking to myself and reading some articles which are totally irrelevant, I encountered the laws of thermodynamics, and the second law of thermodynamics actually drew my attention. So it says the universe proceeds towards disorder, and this disorder is called entropy. And we have to spend constant effort and energy to keep things in order. Still, the total level of entropy can be stable or increasing, so it cannot decrease. I realized that we can connect this to the anti-colonial discourse. We should mention the case of institutions. So institutions spend constant energy to keep things in order. As Daron Acemoğlu and James Robinson argued in their book called Why Nations Fail, the difference between a successful state and a failing state is how institutions were developed. So we should let the post-colonial countries to develop their own institutions instead of inserting a neo-colonial rule in these areas, so that preventing them to form their own institutions.
In the Sandev Here's article, we see that he put forward his reparations. Even though he is right, neither of these matters here are pragmatic nor practical. In addition to this, in his reparations, he used exactly this sentence. I use the following proposition of civilized people. Right here, there's a dichotomy between civilized people on one hand and the others. This is the same word that has been used by colonizers. So he somehow used the same binary as colonizers once used. Again, a distinction has been created.
Also, here is stated that if you build an enterprise on a land that is not yours, you should pay rent. Colonization was the conquest of land that did not belong to the Europeans. So in this sense, we should say, in the two treatises of government, John Locke argues that land is owned by who puts labor on it. So this labor theory of value is essential in both capitalist and socialist modes of production. Therefore, the economy of civilized people, as Hira made this argument as a proposal to the civilized people. So in this sense, the European operation of the colonial lands, as they claimed that they produced more than the indigenous people, actually in the European mind made the lands legitimately European. We can also think that this Lockean sense of understanding of the essence of the value lies under Gillies' theory. So Hira not only fails to address this sense, but also misdirects the reader with such addresses to the civilized people that he constantly did throughout the article.